Google just closed up 9% today. Look at this massive gap up, way above these recent highs. Is Google in price exploration? Are we on to bigger and greater highs? After all, Google is actually the worst performer in the Mag 7, excluding Apple. They're trying to figure things out right now. So with this underperformance, were they due for this big move? Well, it all came down to this. Google avoids their antitrust case. What does this mean? Why is this such a great thing for Google? And what is the future looking like? Is it all blue skies and rainbows? Let's talk about it. So we got to answer these three questions. Why is Google so overpowered? Why are they being targeted by an antitrust lawsuit by the US government? What exactly is this antitrust looking to do? What is the purpose? And is Google ready for takeoff? Is there anything stopping it from setting greater highs like the rest of the Mag 7 has been doing for the past few months? We'll start with one. Why is Google so overpowered? Well, their parent company Alphabet owns a lot of stuff. Google, Android operating system, YouTube. I don't even see Fitbit on here, but Fitbit as well. And when you own this many companies and the primary way you make money is through advertising, you could imagine this almost backbone, right? Let's call this a digital backbone that runs through all these various businesses. Each of these businesses produces some sort of data, whether it be consumer side, business side, operation side, whatever it is. And as a consumer, like you, like I, we interact with these various businesses and these services that Google provides on a daily basis. Why do you think Google makes so much money from advertising? Well, they can collect your information here, 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 here. Yeah, they collect your information everywhere. And with so much of your information, it becomes much easier to target you in advertisements. They've essentially optimized advertising to the absolute maximum. And we can see that in this chart here, advertising revenue of Google. You can see that this trend is basically straight up with a huge jump from 2020 to 2021. This growth isn't slowing down, it's actually accelerating year over year. And so having ownership of all of these different businesses, think about it from Google's perspective, all of these avenues to advertise is critical to their business model and how they make all their money. I mean, check this out. This is the distribution of Google's revenue. And you can see that in 2024, 75% of Google's total revenue came from advertising. Now, this share of their total revenue is shrinking year over year because their cloud platforms and other subscriptions are slowly taking more and more of that share. In other words, they're doing quite well for themselves right now. So now that we understand Google basically has a, dare I say, monopoly on the advertising space, Alphabet owns Chrome, which is the default browser on over 65% of all devices, and obviously the Google search engine, which is the default search engine on 90% of all devices. So yes, dare I say, this is an advertising monopoly. So now that we understand the kind of power that Google holds in this industry, what is the antitrust actually looking to do? How could you break up an advertising giant like this without being completely irrational and unfair? Well, it's worth a quick visit into why antitrust laws exist in the first place. You can thank John D. Rockefeller for almost all of that. Rockefeller's company, the Standard Oil Company, owned 90% of the oil industry from everything from raw materials, transportation, refining and manufacturing of the oil, distribution and marketing, the entire stack from raw materials to delivery of the product to the consumer. And people started to get concerned like, wow, this guy has a whole lot of power over an industry that everybody needs and uses on a daily basis. I mean, look at this. Literally 90% of the entire industry. It is ironic we just talked about Google search engine being the default search engine on over 90% of devices worldwide. Now, why is it so dangerous for a company to own essentially 90% of the industry? Well, they dictate everything. They dictate the supply side, the demand side, and hence control pricing. The price that you pay is entirely determined by what our boy Johnny D wants to charge you. So naturally, people started to get concerned, governments started to get concerned, and that led to the breakup of the Standard Oil Company into 34 unique entities, 34 individual companies. A lot of these which came to be the companies that we all know today and basically run the entire consumer oil industry. Our boy Johnny became the first dollar billionaire from his massive monopoly on oil. There were other companies as well during this time. This occurred in the late 1800s. The American Tobacco Company, which funny enough also owned 90% of the domestic cigarette market. And you can buy their packs of cigarettes for, it looks like, $230 a pop. So go have fun with that one. Basically, the fear of consumers and governments alike was, hey, if this company becomes so large that not even a governmental entity can control it, then this monopoly pretty much has a stranglehold over everything, right? If the company's too big to control, then the whole connotation of a capitalistic economy goes right out the window, as one organization is controlling everything. And as we hinted at, worst case scenario, the company becomes stronger politically and financially than a government. And next thing you know, you're at the financial and political mercy of our good friend John D. Rockefeller. Now, thankfully, John wasn't evil at heart. He was a known philanthropist after his time running Standard Oil Company. But an example of when this didn't go so swimmingly was the British East India Company in the 1600s. They started as a private trading enterprise and became so powerful that they were essentially treated like a quasi-government on the Indian subcontinent at that time. They literally had armies and were at war from what was once a company selling spices and cotton. A company selling spices and cotton to a company of political influence and eventually war. Now, obviously, this is worst case. This is very unlikely, if not impossible, in today's society. But these antitrust issues have been going on for a long time with some of the biggest tech companies. So again, that's enough of the history. I'm sure you get it. I'm sure you get why monopolies are really bad for capitalism and the consumer. And we already talked about how this is one big digital backbone that serves as Google's weapon, their competitive advantage over pretty much everybody. Advertising is very important to them, and they've established this infrastructure that gives them control over the industry. So what was the antitrust trying to do? Well, cut the head of the snake. Through a variety of those companies that Alphabet owns, Google literally owned the buy side, the sell side, and the medium, the exchange between the two sides in the advertising industry. If you wanted to buy placements online to advertise your product, well, you went through Google. If you wanted to sell placements on your website for buyers to buy, well, you went through, you guessed it, Google. And so Google just created the ad marketplace, a place for the buyer, the seller, and the actual auctioning of who's going to get these placements and how much they're going to pay for it. That's all determined by Google. Does this ring any bells? Well, yes. If Google has this ownership of the full stack of advertising, you could imagine rivals don't really have much of a chance. Of course, the Google auction algorithm's always going to choose the option that benefits Google the most and their rivals the least. So again, the antitrust wanted to get rid of this dynamic. So you know what they said? They said, you know what? You keep the whole thing. Just make sure you share some of this data that you're collecting on this massive digital backbone that we talked about with your rivals. Oh, Google, and also your search engine's the default search engine on about 90% of devices worldwide. We need you to stop that. That seems anti-competitive and pretty monopolistic. We're going to prohibit you from engaging in exclusive contracts with companies like Apple. The intent was to say, hey, Google, sorry, you're not going to be the default search engine for all Apple products moving forward. That's the current deal between Google and Apple. Google pays Apple billions and billions of dollars to remain the default search engine on Apple devices. And if you're asking why they pay that much money to be the default search engine, well, there's about, this is probably going to shock you, but 2.35 billion Apple devices on Earth. We're talking about 20 to 30% of the human population in Apple devices. So yes, if Google isn't the default search engine, they're certainly leaving a lot of money on the table in the form of advertising revenue, which we saw is extremely important to them. But what's funny about this is notice the wording, prohibited from exclusive contracts. You know what's not prohibited? Google paying billions of dollars to Apple. So it's funny, I get the intention of what this antitrust is trying to do, but the result just seems to be Google saying, hey Apple, I know we can't officially do this and we can't sign any documents to do this, but hey, if we give you billions and billions of dollars, can you keep us as the default search engine on your devices? Pretty sure Apple's not going to be opposed to that one. That's a lot of free money for them. So far, this really isn't much of a loss at all, in my opinion. The only loss that Google really had in the results of this antitrust case was the loss of their exclusive right to their data. They now have to share that with some of the competition, which is still unclear. The exact amount and type of data isn't specified yet. I'm sure that will change with time. But from going from cut the head of the snake, forcing Google to potentially sell their babies in Chrome and lesser so the Android operating system, to now being required to share some data with rivals, we don't even know how much of that data is actually going to be required to share, seems like a massive win for Google. And as we already saw, investors think so too. There's certainly going to be a big line of people waiting to see some of this Google data, some of this data that runs through this massive digital backbone that they have in the advertising space. And so for now, Google continues to dodge the bullets, the antitrust bullets. They're in the matrix and nothing can stop them for the time being. Again, this is oversimplified. Antitrust, as we mentioned, have been going on against some of these big tech companies for years and years now. Are they monopolies in their respective industries? I mean, I guess you could argue it either side. We just looked at some of the data. So I'll leave that discussion to you. What do you think? What company is a monopoly and why? I want to hear your thoughts. So after all of this, what is next for Google? At the end of the day, we know what happened. For the most part, we know what the results are. All we care about now is what's to come in the future. Is there opportunity here? And my answer would be yes, certainly so. The data says yes. The ad market isn't getting any smaller. In fact, it's growing at a faster rate than it has in the past. And Google owning essentially 90% of the advertising market, this makes for quite the intriguing growth story. And I know people are concerned like, hey, well, these AI overview searches, like, can Google still make money from advertising if nobody's actually going onto websites anymore and just using the AI overview? And the answer is yes. In these AI overviews, you're going to start to see, and you have already been seeing, ad placements integrated into the overview, into Gemini's response. And again, although Google makes a whole boatload of money from advertising, it's the majority of their revenue right now, their other divisions are starting to take a greater and greater piece of the business. Cloud revenue, subscriptions, AI integrations. If these divisions continue to grow, then I don't really see how this is the end of a growth story for Google. If anything, it seems like the beginning of the next phase of the growth story for Google. Investors certainly think so. Do we think this move holds? Do we think the skies are blue, the rainbows are out, the butterflies are flying around? Are we going to continue to make new highs, assuming that the overall economy stays relatively strong? Google has a major role to play in the next age of technological innovation. I go into that in a whole bunch more detail here if you're interested, but I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know what you think. How much longer can these big tech companies continue to dodge and weave the antitrust bullets? I guess we'll have to wait and see. That's it for me. Always appreciate the likes, comments. Thank you for being here. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.